for us. I hope so. Oh, that, yeah. We'll see what we can do. Let's go with my general theme of "You're all doomed," and we'll see where we get. Okay, there we go. Hopefully my mic holds a charge. If you're on the live stream and my mic goes dead, put a comment as soon as possible in the comments, and I will try to get to it. I forgot to charge the case, and it didn't charge the microphone, so I gave it a fast charge, and hopefully that fast charge holds up for an hour here. Okay, so a few things on the agenda today. So people have asked me to kind of fast track looking over some examples for the midterm. So I've got one, and it's a question that I decided to take out after last year. And as I was reviewing people's answers, it was because too many people got 10 out of 10 on it. So we'll look at that, and I'll show you some kind of different tiering for the kind of, degree of kind of, how much information you should be putting, if you're looking for like that 8 to kind of 10 range. And then I've got some examples of some less good answers. So I'll look at that quickly, and probably next class, so Friday, I'll look at a few more examples, and then, Monday, look at a few more. If you're, sorry, you just came in, could you just pop that door so it shuts so we don't get as much noise from the hallway? That'd be lovely. Thank you. As much as I want to hear the screams of the undergrads, let's not. Okay, so let's deal with some questions. Okay, I answered that last class, I think. Oh, we can talk about that in a sec. What are my thoughts on what's going to happen on the strike? I have no idea. I still have a really hard time imagining that a lot of academic staff are going to go on strike. The average salary for a professor at U of A is $164,000. And I know professors are like, we are poor and dying and starving. And that's mostly not true. For sessionals, it's terrible, right? For sessionals, right, you're looking at like $35,000 a year, maybe. For a lot of them, it's really dire. But I don't know that all the tenured professors, who I think make up about half of Oshawa, are going to vote for a strike. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm also imagining, I read an article today saying that the public Catholic and Francophone school teachers have a tentative agreement with the government. So I imagine maybe if we have a strike vote, we're like, down with you, university. And the university will then table a slightly better proposal, and then, the strike will be averted. That would be my guess. I could be wrong, and we'll be on strike for 6 months, and your lives will be delayed for 6 more months, and, that could happen too. So don't take bets on me on what I say, because frankly, I am terrible at predicting things, and I will own that. Am I going to go over topics specifically that are going to be on the exam? Everything from the first day until I'm done education. There, that was easy. We'll go over it a little bit, and we'll kind of do a little bit of review probably on Monday, assuming we're kind of clear of everything. Okay. Strike, Stachka. Gen Z, okay, well, that was a comment about this. When talking about safetyism, do I think that being too safe when the baby is young impacts development, even from a young age? Probably. Let's talk about that later. Okay. I did that last time. All right. So, that looks funnier than it did when I put it together. All right, so here's my slight problem. Putting some of these are a lot of text, and it doesn't appear well on a PowerPoint slide. But I'm going to show you 3 different answers, and I'll upload these to you. I didn't have a chance to do it before class. I'll upload it as a separate PowerPoint so you can have a look and kind of figure out what you want to do. So this is a question that was on the exam last year. This same exam. Let's see if I don't know why that rendered so funny. I'm actually going to see if I can very quickly fix it. We're going to do open heart surgery on the slide. There we go. That's not going to help much, but it'll help a little bit. There, okay, there we did. Open heart surgery on my slide. Okay, so this student got 10 out of 10 on this question, right? So like I said, this question is gone because it was too easy. Like I would say 90% of the students that got this question were getting 10 out of 10. And I was just like, this is way too easy a question. So let's get rid of it. Only hard questions for you. No, I'm kidding. There's still like not terrible questions. This one skewed a little bit easy. But I'll kind of show you what this looks like. So I would rank this in a kind of 8 to 10 range. This one scored 10 out of 10. I'll show you some other answers for the same question that scored a little bit lower, just so you kind of have an idea. And again, I will post this probably tomorrow when I have a chance on Canvas, so you'll have it. And I've got some other practice questions that we'll go over, and I'll talk through how to answer them. Okay, so what are Postman's 3 conditions for the existence of childhood, right? So they list it here: shame, literacy, and school. He believed the absence of these things are the reason the notion of childhood did not exist in the medieval world. Good start. And then, the second part, why does he think each is important? Condition of shame, based on the idea, some things children should not be aware of, right? So that's the definition. You see how much is kind of written there. They go through a little bit of it, a really good, strong definition of each concept, right? Condition of literacy refers to the ability to read, right? Follow the flow of information. And they go into the little bit of the history when most people were illiterate. The main form of communication and flow of information was oral. And I won't read it. You can all read it. And again, I will post this for you. So if you're not reading it as fast as I'm going through it, don't worry. It'll all be there for you. Same thing with, school, right? I thought this was a decent definition. So that was all good. And then one that might be the most in danger of disappearing, they said shame, and then they give the reason, right? A good reason. Technology is more accessible than ever, and they go into, the idea that they have all these devices that kind of give them uninhibited access to information, much of which is adult, right? And they give, the example pornographic material, and that's good enough for, the which condition and why. So it's pretty detailed, right? There's a fair bit of detail here, and each section has a fair bit of text. I put that as a 10. Now, if there were errors conceptually, right, they made it kind of a mistake, I would still put this in that 8 to 10 range, right? So maybe they misidentified something, they gave a definition that didn't kind of fit what I thought, they misrepresented Postman a little bit. I might lower that by a mark or 2. This one I thought was good enough for the 10 out of 10. Okay. I guess I didn't answer this question. We'll get through education, I promise. So it'll be those, history of youth and childhood, generations, and education. We'll definitely get through it. We have enough time. Okay. Are they all going to be short answer? And is there a minimum word count for the answers? That's a good question. They are all short answer, right? 5 short answer questions per exam. That's all the way to the final, non-cumulative. I don't have a minimum requirement because sometimes people wow me with their concision. Sometimes, other times, less so. I'll show you. As a general rule, somewhere between like 200 and 350 words is usually a good answer length. But I hesitate to even give you that because if you have 192 words that are great or 180 words that are great, I don't want you to have to write 20 words that are stupid to fill that gap. So generally speaking, if you think that you are done and you think you've given a good answer, I would say stop. But like usually, 200 to 350 is usually a good range. Recommended, not required. Are you going to write the midterm in person during class time? No. I give you the 24-hour period. You'll get, I think I give you 90 minutes, so slightly more than you'd get in class. So a 90-minute period, you can access it from midnight to midnight. once you start, that 90-minute counter starts. So, you know, that's how it goes. Oh, I guess I just answered 2 questions at once. Huzzah. Okay. You said one thing that will help us is open book format, so have good notes. Is there anything else I would recommend specifically? Go back in time and attend all the classes and listen to my stunning lectures. Or, they're all recorded, so do that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to recommend other than good notes that give you quick access to the information. That's probably my number one. You know, try to keep up with everything. You know, if you do the readings, take some notes. A little bit out of each of those readings is always helpful. Okay, I don't know what else to recommend. Okay, I'm going to show you a less good answer. And I rated this in the 4 to 6 range. And you know, I think it would be obvious why. So they kind of, what I can see in this answer, right, is they've kind of got some of Postman's idea. I gave this 4 out of 10 because, right, it's shame, literacy, and school. And they said separation of information, which I think is kind of shame. I was like, okay, I think that's shame, so part marks there. Special role for children, their own place in society. I'm like, that's kind of school, I guess. A protected environment, that's kind of also school. So literacy is just missing altogether. And then they said the separation of information, which again, I was like, I think that means shame. So I kind of credited them there. No one can say I'm not, at times, somewhat generous in my marking, because I could have just given this 0 and actually probably should have. You know, but because of there, you know, with the internet, kids can easily access adult topics like violence, politics, and more. I was like, yeah, that's basically right. That's shame, even though they used a weird word for it or a weird name for it. So, because they misidentified it, you know, their definitions are all muddly-fuddly. That's the technical pedagogical term for this kind of answer. This is like a 4 out of 10. And I say it's like 4 to 6 range because like there's right things about this. And I don't want to fail people because, you know, that's who I am. So I gave this a 4 out of 10, which I know is a fail, but just because they, you know, have some of the right things, they're making me work really hard to find a right answer in their answer. So don't make me do that. Can we respond in point form or strictly paragraphs? You can do point form, and as I was looking through, there are some people that do good point form. It's risky because sometimes you under-answer the questions, right? Like, again, look at the detail that's here for that 10 out of 10. That's a lot of detail. Hard to do that in point form. Okay. So this was, I put this in the, I think this one I gave a straight 6 out of 10. So I have this in the 5 to 7 range. So they identify correctly, you know, the 3 things. They totally missed this part of the question. They just ignored it altogether. So right off, they lose 3. But I'm like, okay, this is right. So 3 marks for identifying the 3 things. And then they said, right, the thing that's most in danger of disappearing is shame because the internet, social media. So that was good. But, you know, this is a common thing that happens with a lot of questions, is you might miss a part of the question or you don't know or whatever. So sometimes I'm a little bit more subtle with this. This is pretty blunt because I have numbers between them. Sometimes I just have, you know, like these 2 together and I have 6 out of 10. I do that sometimes, or it's a 2-part question. And I just have kind of like a comma separating the 2, or a semicolon separating the 2 parts of the question. If you don't answer both parts, you risk losing marks. But yeah, this is like I said, this I gave it a straight 6 because these 2 parts are okay. You know, not as much detail as that first one for sure, but still, you know, for what's written there, that's an okay mark. Okay, I hopefully that helps. And like I said, will the readings be required on the exam? So I've already answered this a few times, but I'll say, right, they are there to be helpful. The lectures are the main part. The readings are supplementary for your interest and to deepen your knowledge. But it's always helpful if you have, you know, if you're looking for details and information to put into your answers, the readings are a great source of that. I'm not going to force you to do it, and you can still get that 10 out of 10 without it. But the readings are great help. So I hope that has answered the questions. Okay, now that I've used 17 minutes on this, I'm sad. And do you have an idea of the grade averages for the exam, like based on past classes? Yes. On this exam, the grade will be somewhere between 74% and 82. I've been teaching it for 10 years. This format for probably the last 4, and it's always between 74 and 82. Now I'll say, when you score 82, what ends up happening is, so if in classes that have scored higher on this kind of average, on the first exam, the second exam goes down to like 74. Because people are like, I did amazing, I'm so smart, I don't need to study. Then they don't study. People have admitted this to me. They're like, I did amazing on the first one, and I figured I didn't need to study for the second one, and then their grade went down. So almost inevitably, the grades for all the exams will bump between this range. If you do really well, if the class does really well in the first one, it drops, and the opposite. If you like bomb on the first one, then it like jumps for the second one because people work a lot harder. It's like an iron law that I've observed. So yes, all right. I wanted to finish this off really quickly because reasons. I wanted to talk a little bit about this last point and this slide in general because I kind of rushed through it. One of the things that we find with Gen Z, and in general, this is a big determinant of things like hopelessness and mental illness, is where you think the locus of control in your life is. With Gen Z, we tend to, all of our kind of statistical tools and all these different surveys are tending now to point towards an external locus of control, which means Gen Z perceives their lives as being not in their control. They think there are these powerful forces out there controlling their fate, right? Capitalism, patriarchy, billionaires, right? Lots of people like to talk about billionaires, and all of this fun stuff. When you feel like there's an external force controlling your life, you want to burn that force down because you feel frustrated against it, which is where we get, some of these things, where a good number of Gen Zers, don't think they can get ahead, and they think society needs to be torn down and rebuilt because they think there are powerful forces that are holding them in. Now, this is a huge contrast to the boomers. Why? Well, because the boomers really felt an internal locus of control, right? They felt their lives were under their authority. They could do things to get richer, to do better in life and all of that. Now, again, this is not probably without its reasons. The boomers lived in a time with very low income inequality and social inequality generally, in terms of how much money you could make. The gap between the richest and the average was relatively low by historical standards, probably the lowest we've ever seen. Today, that gap has widened quite a bit, and so it's easy to kind of consider an external locus of control. Okay, I want to check one more time for questions. Okay, I think I answered these, so I will take them off the stack of questions. I just said this. I'm not answering it again. Okay. All right, let's move on. All right, so I want to start on education. So we got about a half hour left to start talking about education. So, same Slido and all that stuff. All right, so education, right? Obviously, when we're talking about youth, right, for this topic, education is kind of a big deal. Why? Well, because it is the primary occupation of most young people, right? So if we kind of stick our, definition of youth from 12 to 29, as we have, right, through most of that, young people are going to be engaged in school. And the average kind of age at which someone now leaves school is somewhere between 22 and 24, right? Because increasingly, more people are getting, pardon me, hiccups, that post-secondary education. Okay, at the very least, almost everybody today finishes high school, right? Almost everyone has to complete secondary school. And, the age at which you can drop out is 16 years old. So everybody, up to at least 16 is in school, mostly, until 18 for sure, but increasingly more people in this 22 to 24 range before they get out of school because they're doing some kind of undergraduate degree. Now, that said, and I always find this a little funny, graduating high school is still seen as one of life's transitional moments. And the reason I say I find it a little bit funny, because this really made sense when we're talking about the baby boomers and Gen X, right? Because for a large number, probably about, better than 2/3 of the boomers, high school was all the education they were going to get, and it was all the education that you needed. So what happened when you graduated from high school is you went off into the working world. You got a job, you got married, somewhat, maybe a few years later, or maybe right after, depending on, what part of the baby boomer kind of cohort you were in. So high school really marked that transition from, it was a kind of rite of passage, from childhood to adulthood. And graduating from high school gave you, your high school diploma, which was the base credential, right? So if you go back, even to like the 1980s and 1990s, in kind of television, the kind of phrase was, well, what are you going to do without a high school diploma? And why people said that was it was the minimal level of education that you needed for employers to consider you worthy to hire, right? Now that has changed a little bit. So I always joke with my kids, it's like, you're going to graduate from high school and we're going to have a big party to celebrate even more school in your future, right? It's not the big life transition that it used to be. But we still have things like, prom, like grad, and all of these things to be like, yay, you made it through high school, now for more school. So it's important. Yeah, school though, and if you've taken kind of SOC 100, we talk about this in terms of socialization. School is the major site of secondary socialization for most young people, where they're going to meet a good number of their friends that they're going to have through childhood and adolescence, and where, a lot of their norms and values are going to be set by those same peers. So school is really, really important. Okay, so secondary school, very much, or high school, right? High school is very much still seen as super important, and as performance in high school by students is still seen as a major measure of overall educational health for a society. And we know this because it's measured every couple of years through a test called PISA, or the Program of International Student Assessment. And when a country falls behind, this is often a sort of reason to panic, right? If your PISA score starts to slip, people sort of freak out. Okay, if we go back to the 1990s, low back in those heady days, both Canada and the US lagged really far behind European and some Asian countries in terms of the three things that PISA measures, which is reading, math, and science. Now, the US has continued to be kind of a laggard. The US sort of sits in the mid-20s in terms of its overall performance on PISA. Though, and I'll explain in a second, that number itself sort of requires some nuance. In the 90s, Canada was right there with the US. And then, because we're like, oh man, our high school education really stinks, we're just like Americans. A few Canadian provinces, led by our home, Alberta, basically revamped curriculums and teaching methods in major ways. So under the Ralph Klein progressive conservatives in Alberta, the curriculum underwent a massive change, big changes to teacher preparation programs, which resulted in a huge surge with Alberta sort of dragging up the average. And that remains true. Alberta and Ontario now essentially lead in terms of academic performance in Canada, with Quebec kind of I think if you ranked it as its own country, which I know it wants to be, it would be kind of in the teens. And some places like the Maritimes would rank down with the United States. So, Alberta and Ontario dragged Canada's performance upwards. And by, 2010, Canadian students were reading, or second in reading, fifth in science, sixth in mathematics. And this kind of always goes up and down, right? Canada ranked in 2022, and that's the last results I found, 8th overall, 9th in math, 8th in reading, 8th in science, which, top 10, still doing okay. And there's a lot of focus even on working towards these exams in places like Singapore, South Korea, Finland, where a lot of work goes into actually, sort of preparing students for these kinds of exams so they do better. Okay, the US continues to score really poorly on PISA. And like I said, they're kind of in the kind of in the low 20s, like 22 to like 25 range typically. That said, one thing to say about the United States, it's a massive country with a lot of people and a lot of differences. So if you broke the US up by states, one of the top performing schools systems in the world, like it would basically be number one, would be Massachusetts. So Massachusetts, if it were its own country, would essentially score internationally like right up there with Singapore and South Korea, like number 1 or 2. So what happens is, and I don't want to rag on poor Alabama, but Alabama ranks, if Alabama were its own country, Alabama would rank in the 30s or 40s in terms of academic performance. And this is true of other states like Mississippi, Louisiana, I think Ohio is pretty low as well. Despite some of these places having like great university systems, their primary and secondary school systems are fairly dreadful. So that US number, we can be snotty about it, but, some places in the US score really high. New York State scores really high. California, which used to score really, really high, has basically fallen apart. California used to score in the top 10 if it was its own country. It's now down in like the 20s. And California, has the population of Canada. So, US is an interesting case as well. All right. Now, an interesting kind of side note is in Canada, and even in most of the leading countries, so this is true of Canada, it's true of South Korea, it's true of Poland, which really improved its PISA rankings, Singapore as well, and then did I say Finland? I meant to say Finland. Good results on the PISA are almost entirely driven by the scores of girls, right? If you take Finnish boys, and Finland has consistently scored somewhere between 2 and 8 in the PISA rankings, it scores really, really well. If you take only Finnish boys, they perform no better than the average American. And this is true across the board in pretty much every country that PISA covers, that does the PISA testing, is if you split it by sex, boys are doing considerably worse on PISA than girls are. And the one they struggle the most on is reading. Reading is a real problem for a lot of boys. So we're going to talk about the boy crisis, if there is such a thing, later in this unit, and then a little bit later in the course as well. But there's definitely something where, Finnish girls and Canadian girls do amazing, and they kind of drag up the whole average because the boys don't do nearly as well. Okay. Ooh. So, dropping out. Dropping out, obviously, is a major concern, right? People dropping out of high school is seen as a big problem when rates start to surge for obvious reasons. Because, even though I would say the high school diploma is no longer the kind of base credential, having less than a high school education is essentially a ticket to perpetual poverty for most people, right? There might be outliers where someone dropped out of high school to start their own landscaping business and now they're a multimillionaire. That is the outlier, right? That almost never happens. I've seen some TikToks or YouTube shorts to that effect. And I'm like, okay, even if that were true, which is probably not because it's on the internet, that would be the outlier. But no high school diploma basically, dooms you to poverty. The average income in Canada for someone with only a high school diploma is somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000 a year. So not very much, right? So you can imagine someone without a high school diploma would be even lower. So that's poverty. Okay, now dropping out where we do see it correlates strongly to a bunch of things: social class, gender, and there's of course racial patterns to this as well. In Canada, for example, First Nations and other Indigenous groups drop out at considerably higher rates than the Canadian national average, twice the national average, right? So there's a strong racial component, and in the U.S., you'll see Black people dropping out at a considerably higher rate than any other group. Latinos are ahead of Black people, but they drop out more than, say, white people or Asians. So there are definitely racial socioeconomic patterns. Okay. In terms of social class, lower socioeconomic class I will fix this very quickly, and then I will return to questions. Activate microphone. Okay. Aha. Microphone back. Okay. Thank you for that. Sorry. Can't go back and re-explain. My microphone died. Now it is back. Okay. Do they believe they're entitled to what previous generations had? If not, received assuming it's out of their control. Kind of. It's just like they cannot. Okay, it's fixed. But I hear you twice. All right. Oh, because I turned this microphone back on. There we go. Now you won't hear me twice. Can you hear me once? There's two voices. That might be your problem. No, I'm kidding. Okay. This is a question about the external locus of control. I think it's just like you feel like there's no way you can get ahead. Maybe you feel like your standard of living is going to be lower than your parents. A common one with Gen Z is we're never going to be able to afford housing, and that's real. But I hope you can afford housing. Maybe Mark Carney will fix it. Who knows? But I think it's just a lot of things that feel out of people's control, and so they perceive that their lives are not under their control, and that leads to bitterness. Okay. I know it's fixed now. Okay. If you see that someone else has posted it, you don't have to put it 700 times. Okay. Do most students take the whole 90 minutes for the exam? Not all, but the wise ones. Okay, what was I saying? All right. Okay. Dropping out, part 2. So, key reasons that people drop out. I mean, most typically, there's economic compunction, right? So people, I got to stay close to the computer. I can't wander because it's this microphone now. Most typically, there's an economic component. Maybe they're struggling. Families are in poverty. Maybe they've been kicked out of the house. They need to support themselves. So they have to go find a job, and they just don't have enough time for work and a job, right? So that is a definite possibility. People who are members of subcultures or who have, behavioral difficulties, especially those that start associating with antisocial peers, will start to say, they get into trouble, they have conflicts with school staff, and so they feel like they have little choice but to drop out. All sorts of subcultures, certainly, kind of for a long time, LGBTQ youth, a lot of them dropped out, especially those that became street involved. But other subcultures as well, gang subcultures, kind of things like, back in the 90s, the goth subculture, which tended to get harassed in schools, especially after the Columbine shooting, tended to drop out because they felt unwelcome in those places. So there's lots of reasons. Economic compunction is the big one, but other problems, and especially association with antisocial peers, leading to problems with authorities, is a big one as well. Now, in the short term, people tend to feel good, right? If they're having trouble in schools already, they tend to feel like they are happy that they're out of school, and especially now that they have a job, they're making some money, and that makes them happy. However, in the long term, it tends to be a very negative experience, with many of them trying to redress it through getting high school equivalency degrees, because it limits earning potential, right? If you don't have a high school diploma, a lot of doors are closed, even doors into trades, right? You can't get into NATE to learn a trade without a high school diploma at least. And as we kind of scale up how much education we need, that problem is getting worse and worse. Okay. Oh, fine. I'll go back for 2 seconds. All right. Low socioeconomic class, right? You're poor, more likely need to work to support yourself or your family. And what was the other one? Oh, males is slightly higher than females, typically, and it goes up, especially when construction and resource extraction jobs start paying more. And I gave the example of the North Dakota shale boom, where suddenly there was a labor shortage because all sorts of companies were coming in to drill into shale to get oil and gas, and boom, a lot of men needed lots of high wages available. So at that point, it doubled in North Dakota. Okay. Haha. All right, so post-secondary, where all of you find yourselves. Um, I mean, we're seeing increasing demand for post-secondary, and this seems to be largely driven by two kind of forces. Credentialism, and I'm just going to put educational inflation, or EI. Educational inflation, right? So credentialism and educational inflation are largely driving this, right? Um, I should do a poll. How many of you are here because you just want a degree so you can get a job? That'd always be an interesting poll, but I won't do that. Um, Credentialism is basically the idea that you need some kind of degree or certificate, to have that basic access to the labor market, right? So you earn the high school diploma or the undergraduate degree as a kind of credential that allows you access to the labor market, right? So your degree, you're taking a degree with a major in sociology and a minor in psychology or vice versa. Why? Well, not because you necessarily want to be a sociologist or a psychologist, but because you had to take something. Those two things seemed kind of interesting. You combine them into a degree, but when you get out, right, what are you going to do? Who knows, right? But it's unlikely to be, becoming professionally a sociologist. Not everyone is as lucky as me. So, credentialism. Educational inflation is the other one. And that is basically you need more and more education to sort of stay in that base tier of the labor market or to move up, right? So, just to get that basic, like white collar entry level job, you need an undergraduate degree, right? In a way that in the past, maybe you only needed a high school diploma or a 2-year certificate from a community college. Today, it's a 4-year degree from an accredited university. Now, to get those really great jobs increasingly, right, the ones that you really want, the ones that are 100K or more, you need a master's degree. But I'll talk about educational inflation in a little bit, and maybe even more than that. Because even the PhD, in some sense, is being eclipsed by even more education, which makes me want to weep openly. But I won't because I'm very dignified. Okay, this British stiff upper lip and all that. Not that I'm British. So, lots of growth for post secondary because of those two forces. Even more now being driven by growing middle classes in developing nations, right? So, when we have international students, right, and the Western university system has feasted for years on the higher tuition of international students, lots of this is being driven by this particular phenomenon. You have growing middle classes, and in those countries, right, China, India, parts of Eastern and Central Europe that used to be behind the Iron Curtain, Africa increasingly, other parts of Southeast Asia and Asia, we see the same thing, right? In order to get ahead in the labor market, you're going to need more education. There aren't enough university spots in, say, places like South Korea to accommodate everyone that wants to go to university. So they come here as international students, right? It's also driven by the fact that a lot of Western institutions are seen as extremely prestigious compared to their peers in other parts of the world. U of A, maybe not so much. Even though we're top 5 for sustainable development, which they had on their website for quite a while. It's like we're top 5 for sustainable development. Not for academics, but places like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, UCLA, those really prestigious, the University of Toronto, which I've been told by people who went there is the Harvard of Canada. My friend Sean never tires. I swear to God, every time I have a conversation with him, he has to say, well, when I was doing my degree at the University of Toronto, I'm like, yeah, Sean, I know where you went to school. We talk about it every time we have a drink. Um, anyway, I joke about University of Toronto, right? People want to go to these prestigious schools because those degrees carry some weight as well, and especially for some of these middle class people in non-Western countries. Okay, so we have more and more demand for post-secondary. How am I doing for time? So good. Also, we're seeing an increased focus, and governments especially, pushing for increases in vocational training. Now, some of this is in the trades, right? So you would think apprenticeships. Some of it isn't, but increasingly, depending on where you live, and more neoliberal kind of places are going to be more like this. They want vocational paths for people. So you education that translates directly into jobs. That's what a vocational path means. So things like engineering, nursing, teaching are all vocational um, educational paths, right? Because they end in jobs. And there's increasing pushes by a lot of governments to push people into vocations, right? Because they're like, um, what's the old joke? Do I have it? Oh, I took it out. I had it a few years ago. It was like engineering, what do I want to make? Science, what do I want to study? And arts, do you want fries with that? Um, as someone who has 3 arts degrees, trust me, I feel your pain. But the idea that, a general arts degree or even a general science degree doesn't get you a specific job. So a lot of people come out of school with those things and then kind of struggle in the labor market to place themselves and maybe place themselves in jobs where they have a skills mismatch. They have skills, but there's no employer looking for those particular skills. Okay. And as much as I would love to say critical thinking is a skill that most employers really want, apparently not. Okay. So more pushes for vocational training in both kind of practical grounds and in professional fields, in white collar fields as well. I'm gonna do my last point on this slide and then I'll let you leave. I know I have a minute left. The other thing we increasingly see in post-secondary is people coming back for further education, part-time students and older students who are upgrading skills for a changing job market, right? Maybe you need, in the past it was you learned how to draft on paper and then you had to come back and do courses in AutoCAD. Now it's probably like, you trained in the pre-AI era and now you have to come back and learn how to do things, in the era of AI. Okay, that's 350. I am out of time. I will answer this next class. Hey. About sorry? So, I mean, do you want the answer is going to make you feel better or the real one? It's a basic IQ test. It's a basic like way of filtering out, is this person essentially competent, able to, carry through projects, carry through, relatively complex things, stay on task, focus, get through, a program, right? And the reason, like, and honestly, like, this is extremely apparent when you look at kind of hiring trends. So I have a friend, really, good guy, and he worked in project management. He dropped out of university. He was doing an economics degree, couldn't master econometrics, got tired of being broke, and so he went to work for his father-in-law. And he worked for his father-in-law for 15 years, doing project management for this company that, I don't know, they built some kind of industrial product like pumps, that people use for reservoirs and all sorts of things. And then what's that? I feel like I know where this is going. Well, then his father-in-law retired and he's like, I'm going to sell the company. And he didn't get along with the new owners. So they bought him out and here's $50,000, get the fuck out of here. And he spent the next 3 years looking for a job. And he said the biggest problem he had was that he never finished that university degree. And so when people were sorting through the resumes, right? He had 15 years of project management experience. It's like he's probably better than whoever they were going to hire, but he didn't have that base credential. And so when employers are looking to filter out people, one of the things is no degree, in the garbage. I won't even look at your resume because it's seen as a sort of test of intelligence and competence, right? You have to be X intelligent.
Start doing that. Just not the way that society, I think, based on what you can prove that you can do. Like, you don't Like, I don't know. Maybe that that just might be me being like an adult.
You know, I wish that's what it. I wish that's what it was. That would be, I think, a better world. I think we'd all be happier in that world. You know, your proof of your actual abilities would matter
There's no value in experience. It's
in certain kinds of experience if you have, you know, if you have that base credential. But everybody has to filter, right? Everybody has to say like, okay, this person is a potentially good candidate. This one isn't, because every HR department, you know, any job that they post, they're going to get 100 applicants. So you just have to like have a sorting mechanism, and it's, you know, education can be a very quick sorting mechanism, right?
even if like the information about the people. So remember in my mom, are you gonna start?
Oh, you mean like retirement or old folks homes? Yeah.
Like with my
No, and I mean it's
my mom's aunt, like she lives with her son, and he like his family takes care of her.
we are the weird ones in the world. Like honestly, we are a historical and cultural abnormality in that respect, right? To like outsource the care of your own parents.
I mean, my mom can be stressful, but she can live with me. I can just like get a nurse, but it's like, say, they'll stay over.
Interesting too, kind of socially, because you know, with kind of more recent immigrants, you see this kind of like model as well, this like extended family where grandma and grandpa have a significant role in family life, right? They live with the family. They often take care of the younger kids while parents are at work, or they're the ones picking them up at the bus after school, right? Because they live together. And I mean, historically, that's much more normal than the Western way, which is like, you know, the Abe Simpson, the Simpsons kind of like, you know, we're gonna put grandpa at the old folks' home. That, right? That's a real historical abnormality. And I do at times wonder,
Started.
well, I know why it started. I mean, it's not hard to figure out. Like, people are so busy, right? And the way we build homes increasingly isn't
Suitable for many people.
right. It's not suitable for an extended family. Like, honestly, I have 3 kids. When we were looking for a house, it was like okay, just looking for somewhere with 4 bedrooms.
Why are the bedrooms in this country so small?
Well, you should see my kids' bedrooms. They're pretty massive.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah,
But the room, like, even when my family, we were trying to find different houses, different sizes, different neighborhoods, they were all so small.
well,
Not like ridiculously small, but a lot smaller than what we were used to.
I think part of it is like the physical footprint of houses has gotten smaller, right? Because land got really expensive, houses got really expensive. They were like, oh, let's pack as many as possible in here. So, you know, you're gonna make each house smaller, which means each room kind of gets smaller in general.
Extra floor.
Well, you could do that, but you know, there are
It's cheaper to just make some.
well, yeah, but they also like family size in Canada is really small. Like,
Yeah, oh, I've heard of that.
you know, we'll talk about it. This will be my least pop. This is the one that's most likely to get me tarred and feathered. Just because I'm like, generally marriage is really good for kids. You shouldn't get divorced. Divorce is bad. Don't get divorced.
Or at least until they're older. And
Well, okay.
Like
Even
after
then,
they move
it
away?
can cause some
It
psychological
can, but
damage.
less
But yeah,
than
it's
if
it's
they're, like,
less bad than when they're
12.
like 12.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I mean, just if you want to like statistically, kids who grow up in 2-parent homes, like the advantages they have are like it's so much that it's actually kind of hard to fully quantify it, but it's a lot, right? And those ethnic groups, especially where like parents almost never get divorced. I'm thinking of Asians, dear God, their children out by just such a margin. That's like,
I think it's because their parents kind of fulfill things for you they wouldn't be able to. Like if you're really strict and then your wife is like a little more lax, it's like you kind of make like it's like even ground for your kids as opposed to one or the other, where you kind of don't get a sense of how things should be.
I mean, it's a
That's
resource
my
thing.
theory.
It's a resource thing too, right? Like
Mm.
2 parents is more than 1 parent, you know. And I have a whole unit on this, where we talk about families. It's either the most popular or the least popular, because I'm like, I'm just like, yeah, you know, that whole thing where we're like kids are adaptable and divorce isn't a big deal. That's not true. at all. And there's no social statistics that suggest like people are like, what if people are beating their kids? I'm like, okay, in that like super yes, it would be better that those parents get divorced. But in virtually any other scenario, the parents should for if what you're looking for is the good of the kid, parents should be together.
Yeah, as long as they can hide their issues.
Yeah, or work on them, work on yourself. Don't be so damn selfish. I don't know. There are moments I say unpopular things. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
think
it's
people should take those too personally.
but we have such I think, an individualistic view of marriage, and it's like marriage is there to make me happy.
Marriage, okay, but when you have kids,
I mean, but that is an attitude. But for a lot of people, it's like, well, won't my kids be happier if I'm happier? What's that?
is it a bad attitude?
No, no, I think it's wonderful. I think that's
Sorry,
charming.
anecdotal.
I think that's charming and lovely, but it's not the Western individualized mindset, which is like, well, if I'm happier, my kids will be
See,
happier.
but then that's really interesting because then when we're all growing up, we all attribute all of our issues to our parents.
Right.
But then when we become parents, it's like, actually, I can. So, okay. It's going to pick you first every time, then, I guess.
Well, that's again, I need to at some point work in a book that I read last year called The Rise and Triumph of Modern Self, which might replace the Postman stuff next year if I can sort of get my head around how to integrate it into the course. Because it's all about how we went from being very communal to very like me, 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 me. I mean, there's good things about it. There are also some really, really problematic things, and
I just train accidents didn't exist until trains did. So it's all of the issues that
yeah, potentially. I just think it's like everything has consequences, and we're often really bad at judging what those consequences are going to be.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's the issue. Right now.
we're like, we should make divorce easier for XYZ reasons. And like, okay, what you're going to have though is like, you're going to create inequality based on who has married parents and who doesn't, right? Not going to be a little because it's considerable.
Do you think there would ever be systems to kind of try to?
You're asking for my predictions, and I told you at the beginning of this class, I'm terrible at making predictions.
Dearest.
I think eventually here's what's going to happen, and I'll predict this. We're in a fertility crisis. There's really no question. Globally, we're in a big fertility crisis. We're not having enough kids. And that is going to manifest in a lot of really bizarre ways, but mostly we're going to have a lot of old retired people and not that many young people. And I think what's going to happen is governments are going to be like, and really start to push from both a policy and a cultural perspective. You need to have more kids, and yeah, banning abortions, or at least they probably not outright banning it, but severely limiting. It'll be like, 15-week abortion bans, like anything beyond that,
Sometimes people don't even know.
Oh, yeah, I'm not advocating for this. You're asking me to make predictions. On what I'm saying is we're going to end up in a situation where I think there's going to be a flip because kind of more quote unquote traditional family forms generate more kids. And the fertility crisis is going to get so bad, and we're going to have such a top heavy society with like a lot of old people and just not enough young workers to service all of their needs, pay all the taxes, that governments are going to have to start pushing higher fertility. So it might be like women's rights are going to get curtailed, right?
Increase wages.
It's never worked.
Or like lower tuitions, possibly.
Potentially, but honestly, like lots of places have tried, like, hey, I'm going to pay you to have babies. Never works, right?
I guess sometimes once
it worked for short periods.
Yeah.
Right. Like, but Hungary is doing, and we'll talk about this later in the course too. Hungary is currently dumping something like 5 to 6% of their GDP into fertility efforts. Right. Like trying to convince people to have more kids.
Why aren't people having kids in Hungary?
That is a really interesting question. And it's super, well, there's so many parts of this. one of the big reasons seems to be, well, greater opportunity for women. So
Yeah.
every baby you have is sort of opportunity cost, right? At the time that you're out of the workforce is lost wages, lost advancement, all of those sorts of things. It's a problem that seems almost impossible to fix, right? You can have maternity leave, but while you're having maternity leave, you're not moving forward in your career, right?
They pay you for maternity leave.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Canada, they pay you half or 55% of your salary
But what
for
if they have
12 months, or 18 months, it's like 35%. It's not a lot of money. But even then, like even if you're on mat leave and you're still earning some money, you're losing forward motion in your career, right? And it becomes hard. Like honestly, the more kids you have, the tougher it is to balance all of the roles you have to play, even if you do go back to work. The other one I would say is, especially for women, they're having trouble finding men that are
suitable?
suitable.
Especially these online shows where you have to go find your match, and it's the most bizarre. It's so fascinating to watch.
I
and
can
it's
only
just so
imagine that this is
really
also
upsetting.
what Tinder and Hinge and these dating apps are.
I assumed those were just for hookers. I thought like we all just thought they.
Yeah, I don't know, because like increasingly we look at the statistics and
Mm.
more people where they're meeting even the partners they have is some kind of online dating sites. Now there's definitely the ones like Tinder that are
Yeah,
just for
Tinder,
hooking
like,
up,
yeah.
right? It's just like horny, let's do something.
Yeah.
But there are, other ones, Bumble and
I know there's ones you have to pay for. Is it eHarmony that you have to pay for?
eHarmony. Yeah, there's tons of dating apps, right? Every time I watch Prime, there's one that's advertised to me, to which I can only imagine Prime Amazon apparently knows nothing about me, because I'm like, "Ah, I've been married for 20 years. It's like you're wasting your time running these dating app things on me. Like this is just dumb. Like your algorithm needs better like functionality,
Yeah.
because like you should know that something. I order a ton of stuff from Amazon, and
Yeah, they should actually.
you'd think that they'd have some sense, married with kids, but apparently they're just too dumb to
I mean,
bother.
maybe they know when there's trying to,
Yeah,
get
maybe
married people up there still.
like you need to hook up outside of your marriage. There's an app to do it. But yeah, men are really struggling, and it's something like my awareness of this is growing. A lot of the careers that men used to do really well in have disappeared, or there's less of them available.
Mhm.
And so for some subset of men, some of them are going to do fine in the service industry. Hi, I'm here.
Or even like just
Doing
being smart.
doing okay, right? That's not universally true for men.
I
Like,
mean, like in like education, things like science and tech and things like that. They're
yeah,
doing.
but they have to compete with very capable, very smart women in these fields as well, and they're having trouble keeping up. Um, and for mysterious reasons too. Like Kalamazoo is such an interesting kind of it's a city in the U.S.
Oh,
It's a really, really interesting sort of case study because of the grant of a very, very rich person from Kalamazoo. Anyone who graduates from a high school in Kalamazoo gets free free post-secondary education at an institution of their choice within like a range, like not Harvard, but like public universities.
It's amazing.
And you know what it's done for men?
Mhm.
Diddly shit.
Wow.
Not a thing.
Why? Even with the stats about like the girls being the ones to like pull up.
No. We don't know. It's like we're like, okay, is it cost? It's not cost. It's something deep inside like male and female psychology, which is and the way we've constructed our education system that isn't working for men and boys.
Is it because you think it was kind of created by women?
I don't
It's like with
know.
the car thing, how like car seats were like the accident, like the airbag thing. It was for children, and so
So I don't know, to be honest. Like it's something like I've done a ton of reading on it, and I don't have a good answer. It's something like I think there is a kind of when we think about men in general, men are more kinetic, more action oriented, they're more interested in objects than people. A lot of the careers in like the growing service industries, oh, what does Richard Reeve call them? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. But things like nursing, teaching,
Active professions, things you
but they're very person to person, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of men really struggle with that interpersonal aspect more so than women. Women are way more social.
Yeah.
You know,
Have these studies been done in different countries to maybe see like the cultural aspects of
it's
it?
it looks like it's pretty universal,
Yeah.
right? That
So
men are just kind of struggling across the board. There are places where it's less pronounced. The US is particularly bad.
in the
Um,
US kind of that whatever.
Being edge of everything, right?
Not when it comes to people stuff.
Yeah, just because it's a weird society. It's like
It's like an experiment.
it is very much an experiment.
Yes.
Yeah, so but yeah, it seems like men are really struggling, and this again, it makes it really hard for women who are up. Okay, the other thing, women also have a weird thing in their psychology where women are well, not universally, but almost hypergamous.
What is that?
So women very rarely will marry downward in
Yeah.
terms of social
People
class.
are saying it's because of evolution. It's like before you get some money to do the same protecting, so you have to marry upwards to
Right.
yeah.
But there's a lot of men who are kind of in terms of earning potential and future potential way lower than their female counterparts. And it just looks like women are just like not interested. And so it manifests in these weird things like every woman, not everybody, but lots, it's something like 80% of women, like when they go on a dating app, they set their range for they want men 6'2" and above,
I think that's weird. I think that's really strange.
which is like 3.2% of the population or something like
And
that.
it's unsettling to see in public. 5'2" and their boyfriend's like 6'3".
I had a friend who married a guy who was like super tall, and I was like, and she's like, up to my shoulder, and I'm like,
How does that
the mechanics of this kind of confuse me, but whatever. I'm good. Like kissing seems like it would just be awkward because someone's
yeah,
like
usually it's
hunched
different.
over, whatever
Yeah.
they made it work until it didn't. Um, but yeah, it's so in terms of like socioeconomics, like women, it seems like really burned in like evolutionarily that they're
Mhm.
hypergamous. And so when men can't match that standard, there's like a mismatch, right?
Because I feel like since women have evolved to seek out better mates with better opportunities, why haven't men been able to adapt with the way that
Yeah, I think the social changes have been really quick,
yeah,
right? Like you're thinking the period of 70 years, right? Which is like a blink
yeah,
of
it's
an
been
eye.
really intense.
Yeah, it's been an intense 70 years. And so that's a lot of adaptation. Like whole economies have been destroyed in this time, right?
Especially the
I mean, if you went,
countries have been created and fallen back apart.
well, but like if you go back to the 1940s, the bulk of the economy was in manufacturing and agriculture. And today, manufacturing and agriculture are less than 10% of the economy.
But I always assumed that with the way that things evolve in society, that people would still be able to find things to do. Like even if it's like, okay, the machines are doing all the farming, but we still need someone to maintain the machine. It's just about
But the number of those people has gotten smaller and smaller, right?
Mhm.
So it's just that fewer people are needed to farm even more land because the machines have gotten so good. So yeah, you need heavy duty mechanics to fix tractors.
Mhm.
You don't need that many of them, right? You don't need as many as like the 30% of people that used to be engaged in farming, right? Now it's two. So a lot of those jobs that men did, right? Construction, um, trades, resource extraction. I'm trying to think of the other one, farming. The fewer and fewer people do them. There's more and more automation in those fields. We need less people to do them. They're a smaller and smaller part of the economy. And for whatever reason, they just haven't been able to figure out how to move men into the growth areas, right? Which are like,
But why haven't they?
I don't know. it's it, you know,
Especially with
it's like
technology benefits, but it's like it's easier for them in certain fields because it's like
there are some people that would argue that we've, had too much focus on women, right? And like improving women's health. I don't think that's true.
We're still
Um,
not, there's not that many of us in like advanced fields still. We're doing pretty good.
well, we'll talk about that at the end of this unit. It's changing a lot,
It
right?
is,
The
yeah.
balance is changing a lot. There are some places like engineering where it's massive underrepresentation.
I know one girl in um,
Taught engineering classes. It's like the mirror image of sociology classes. In sociology, it's like 80-20,
yeah,
and in you know
like
engineering, it's
physics.
like 20-80,
Yeah,
right?
I know,
So,
yeah.
but outside of that, like law, medicine, like sciences, biotech, all of those are either becoming female dominated or they're very close to parity.
I just always kind of assumed that if there were fields that women were unable to get into before because of stigma, that there were maybe fields that men wanted to get into but were scared to because of stigma, things like nursing and teaching.
That apparently is not the case.
So what do they want?
I don't know. This is the problem. No one knows. And you can give them free education. You can give them social programs. All of the or most of the social programs that have been tried, things like free education, benefit women, and they do almost nothing for men. And it's like, we want to help men, right? Like, you could take black boys and black girls and be like, okay, we're going to have a program to give them free college. And you're going to see huge improvements for black women and almost nothing for black boys.
Extremely unethical experiment. I feel like I saw the situation pretty quickly. That's so interesting. And like there's
And the world was completely different.
yeah,
Everything was
exactly.
physical, right?
So you were stuck doing what you were doing. People are satisfied in that aspect. Maybe you did
Well,
your
I don't
job,
know,
but like
satisfied, but it was like you had to do
no,
that to
like
live. But
you had to yeah, exactly.
you
You had a
know,
job, you had something, you hate it, at least you can
right. And a lot of those were male oriented jobs because you know, mining's hard.